Beyond the Gates spoilers tease that Tyrell Richardson finds himself caught in the eye of a family storm that feels far too large for him to handle. The emotional weight bearing down on him is almost invisible to those outside his world, but to Tyrell, it's all-consuming. His carefully balanced life begins to unravel the moment Martin Richardson, his father, reveals a long-buried family secret that changes everything Tyrell thought he knew. The revelation sends ripples across their household, and it doesn't take long before Bradley "Smitty" Smith, Tyrell's other father, hears the truth. To outsiders, they were the model of strength, two fathers raising a young man in a modern world, managing both love and legacy. But the foundation they built cracks open under the pressure of what Martin had kept hidden for so long. When Martin confides in Smitty, it's not just a confession, it's a last-ditch plea to save what they had. But Smitty, blindsided and hurt, can't process the betrayal. He lashes out, tells Martin to leave. The decision, impulsive and emotionally charged, leaves Martin without a home and Tyrell without the two most important people in his life under one roof. Tyrell doesn't know how to navigate the wreckage. He tries to be neutral, tries to avoid taking sides, but it's impossible when the pain is so close. He sees Martin sleeping on a friend's couch and hears Smitty pacing alone at night. For the first time in his life, Tyrell feels like a child again, powerless in the face of adult decisions he didn't ask for. That's when Vernon Dupree steps in. Vernon knows the smell of shame. He recognizes the weight of secrets that rot relationships from the inside out. And more importantly, he knows this one intimately. Because Vernon's past is tied to Martin's fall. It happened years ago, in a moment of desperation and misjudgment. Vernon made a call. Martin covered for him. The lie grew roots, and over time it became harder to distinguish from truth. Vernon was grateful. He never forgot. But he also never imagined the cost would eventually come back to claim Martin's peace and destroy his family. When Tyrell shows up on Vernon's porch one evening, tears barely hidden, Vernon doesn't say much at first. He just hands the boy a glass of lemonade and lets him talk. Tyrell unloads everything. The arguments, the silences, the nights spent alone at friends' houses to avoid choosing sides. The feeling that his family is gone and that it might never come back. Vernon listens. Every word. Then, finally, he speaks. "I broke something once," Vernon says. "And I let someone else pay the price." Martin didn't just do what he did out of guilt. He did it because he loved me. He thought saving me meant sacrificing a piece of himself. But now it's time I fix what I let happen. Tyrell is skeptical. "You really think you can make them talk to each other again? They don't even look at each other." Vernon chuckles softly. "Pride makes men fools. But love? Love has a way of digging up the truth and making space for it to breathe." He promises Tyrell that he will talk to Smitty. That he will own what happened. And more than anything, he will try to give Martin a way back, not just into Smitty's house, but into his heart. The next day, Vernon visits Smitty. Smitty answers the door cautiously, eyes wary. He hasn't seen Vernon in months, and the last time they spoke, they argued over an old tour contract. But this time Vernon isn't there as a manager or family liaison. He's there as a man trying to make something right. They sit on the back porch, the silence between them longer than the conversation at first. Then Vernon lays it bare. He admits to everything. The decision he made. The consequences he passed on to Martin. The guilt he's carried. And how none of it justifies Martin keeping secrets, but how it does explain why Martin felt trapped. Smitty doesn't interrupt. He watches Vernon with guarded eyes, but as the minutes pass, the tension in his shoulders eases. When Vernon finishes, he looks down at his hands. "I didn't leave him because of the secret," Smitty finally says. "I left him because he forgot that I would have stood beside him through it. But he didn't trust me with it. That's what hurt." Vernon nods. "So let him try again. With no lies this time. It's not a solution. But it's a beginning." Later that week, Vernon arranges a dinner. Neutral ground. Anita cooks. Nicole and Danny light candles and set the table. It's just family. No agenda. No confrontation. Martin arrives first, clearly nervous. Tyrell stays close to him, like an anchor. Smitty arrives 10 minutes later. He doesn't say much. But he doesn't leave either. The dinner is awkward at first. But as the meal unfolds, so does the conversation. Vernon keeps things light, sharing old stories. Nicole teases Danny about her cooking disasters. Tyrell finally gets a laugh out of Smitty. Then Martin speaks. Quietly. Carefully. He apologizes. Not just for the lie, but for forgetting that love only grows where truth lives. Smitty doesn't reply immediately. But after dessert, he asks Martin to walk with him. Just the two of them. The family watches from the porch as they disappear down the garden path. Tyrell leans into Vernon. Do you think it worked? Vernon smiles. It wasn't about working. It was about showing up. That's where everything starts. The moon rises, casting a soft glow over the yard. Somewhere in the distance, Martin and Smitty are talking. And for the first time in weeks, Tyrell breathes easier. Not because everything is fixed, but because someone finally tried to fix it. The garden walk between Martin and Smitty stretched on longer than anyone expected. The conversation began in fits and starts a cautious exchange of thoughts, a shared memory here and there. But as the minutes passed, the rawness between them gave way to something deeper. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. A quiet acknowledgement of everything they had survived and everything they had allowed to fall apart. Tyrell stood at the kitchen window, watching the silhouettes of his fathers move slowly beneath the lantern-lit hedges. His chest tightened with every second they remained outside. Beside him, Vernon stood with a mug of tea, calm but alert. He didn't speak, letting Tyrell sit in the moment. Whatever came next needed to belong to them. When Martin and Smitty returned, their expressions were unreadable. They rejoined the family circle in the living room where Anita, Nicole, and Danny had already started picking at the leftover pie. Martin took a deep breath and reached for Smitty's hand. We're not okay, Martin said simply. But we want to be. Smitty gave a small nod. We agreed to start over. Not from scratch. Just from where we are. The room exhaled. Tyrell, stunned into stillness, looked from one man to the other. His throat tightened. For weeks, he had been waiting for someone to make sense of the chaos. But in that moment, he realized it wasn't about finding clarity. It was about choosing each other despite the confusion. He crossed the room and hugged them both. No words. Just the embrace. The following days moved slowly. Smitty didn't invite Martin home, but they met each morning at the park. Walked. Talked. Sometimes just sat in silence. Martin stayed with Vernon and Anita in the guest room, finding comfort in the presence of old rhythms. Nicole and Danny floated in and out, providing the comic relief and logistical structure to a family still learning how to function again. Tyrell started journaling. Late nights in his room, headphones on, writing poems and lyrics. He didn't know if it was music yet, but it felt like survival. Vernon began gently nudging Martin to open up publicly. You don't have to broadcast it all, he said. But people believe lies louder when the truth stays quiet. Martin resisted at first. His shame lingered, stubborn and thick. But after a quiet conversation with Tyrell one night where Tyrell said simply, I need to know you're proud of who you are, not just sorry for what you did, Martin agreed. He recorded a podcast episode with Danny and Nicole, a candid one-on-one where he spoke about family, regret, and rebuilding. No spin. No rehearsed lines. Just him. The episode went viral. Not because of the scandal, but because of the honesty. Listeners wrote in by the thousands, many from LGBTQ+ families, sharing how their own fractures mirrored Martin and Smitty's. How hearing two men try to work their way back to each other gave them hope. Smitty listened in silence when it aired. Then he called Martin. Come home. Let's take it one morning at a time. Martin moved back in the following week. There were still arguments. Therapy sessions. Stumbles. But they faced them together. And Tyrell, for the first time in a long time, stopped bracing for the worst every time he came home. One Saturday, while clearing the garage, Smitty found a dusty box of Tyrell's childhood notebooks. songs, scribbles, short stories. He gave them to Tyrell with a smirk. "You always had something to say. Maybe now you'll say it where people can hear it." It sparked something. Tyrell spent the next 2 weeks transforming one of the poems into a full spoken word piece. Vernon helped him fine-tune the structure. Nicole offered to produce a video. Danny found an old recording booth they could borrow. They called the piece Thread. Tyrell debuted it at a community arts night hosted by the Second Exit Project. Anita introduced him, her voice thick with pride. As Tyrell stood beneath the spotlight, he looked out into the crowd, his fathers sitting side by side, Vernon and Anita near the front, Nicole and Danny at the tech board. He began. "We are not made of breakage, but of what we braid between the breaks. Of hands let go and reached again. Of silence shattered and sung anew." By the time he finished, the room was on its feet. Afterward, Smitty hugged him so hard it nearly cracked his ribs. Martin wiped tears from his eyes and whispered, "You gave us something to believe in." Again. The piece was uploaded the next day. It gained traction fast, especially among younger audiences craving authenticity. Tyrell was invited to speak at schools, contribute to arts panels. His story, once something he feared would define him in sadness, became a doorway for others to walk through with strength. Vernon, watching it all unfold, felt something he hadn't felt in years: resolution. Not because everything was perfect, but because, for once, everyone was moving in the same direction. The family, frayed and tested, wasn't healed overnight. But it was no longer unraveling. And that made all the difference. Tyrell later wrote in his journal, "Some bridges don't burn. They bend. They creak. But if you walk them carefully, they still carry you home." And so they kept walking. Together. Months after Tyrell's debut at the Second Exit Project, the waves of change in the family had settled into something resembling peace. Not a perfect peace, but an honest one, the kind where people showed up to try again, every day, even when it was hard. Martin and Smitty had found a rhythm again. Morning coffees. Joint therapy. Weekend yard work. They still argued, but the silences afterward no longer stretched into days. They forgave in real time now. Tyrell, meanwhile, leaned into his new voice. What began as spoken word turned into a fusion of poetry and music, drawing from the rhythms of his upbringing and the ache of his lived experience. He released a small EP titled Half-Light, with each track representing a moment in the journey between fracture and healing. Vernon called it the sound of a soul finally making peace with itself. The EP caught the attention of indie curators and podcast hosts. Invitations rolled in. But Tyrell wasn't interested in being famous. He wanted to build a space where other voices like his could be heard. Inspired by the Second Exit model, he proposed a youth residency program, 10 weeks of guided writing, mentorship, and community for LGBTQ+ teens navigating family, creativity, and identity. Anita backed the idea instantly. Sharon and Tracy signed on as co-mentors. Nicole and Danny found funding. Vernon offered to oversee the wellness program. Smitty donated studio time. And Martin, quietly and without ego, offered to handle administrative logistics. They named it the Braided Path. Tyrell insisted on one rule: no press. No social media posts from inside. The work was sacred. What happened in those rooms belonged to the youth, not to the outside world. The first session began in spring. 15 teens showed up from across the country. Some had scars they spoke about openly. Others held their pain close. But slowly, trust formed. Through shared meals, long nights of writing, laughter, and grief. Tyrell sat with each of them in one-on-one sessions, guiding, listening, never lecturing. At the end of the program, they hosted a closed recital. No cameras. Just family. The room was full of quiet tears, erupting applause, and moments that would never make headlines but would live forever in memory. After the final performance, Tyrell stood on stage and looked out at the small, powerful crowd. "We didn't fix each other here," he said. "We just stopped pretending we were broken. That might be enough." Later that night, Vernon approached him. "You built something I never knew was possible," he said. "You gave them what none of us knew how to give ourselves." Tyrell smiled. "You gave it to me first. I just passed it on." Smitty and Martin held hands during the closing circle. It didn't escape anyone's notice. Not as a symbol of reunion, but of commitment to the ongoing work of being whole together. The Braided Path residency became an annual program. And Tyrell? He kept writing. Sometimes songs. Sometimes poems. Sometimes letters he never sent. He wasn't searching anymore. He was grounded. On the anniversary of his first piece, he returned to the same stage at the second exit project. The room was full of familiar faces. Anita, Nicole, Danny, Vernon, Martin, Smitty, Sharon and Tracy, and dozens of young people who now called the space their creative home. He didn't perform that night. Instead, he stood quietly while a new voicea young poet from the most recent residency read a piece dedicated to him. Tyrell listened, hands folded, eyes wet. When the reading ended, he rose, embraced the poet, and whispered, "It's yours now. Keep it loud. No curtain call. No encore. Just legacy. Built not on what was broken, but on what they dared to rebuild." And in that, Tyrell finally found the one thing he thought he'd lost forever. A home that would never fall apart again.